Well, good morning, everybody. I'm Representative Dan Christensen, the House Republican leader. We're on day 86. We're close, and we're still very, very hopeful that our friends in the Senate will work with us to get us across the finish line in 105 days. Those faces don't look very positive, but mine still is. We've got, of course, we've now got budgets out of both the House and the Senate. We are at that critical time, the last few weeks of session, where we start gathering up the corners of the building, and we start talking about the details as to where we're going to end up. And so we've got plenty of negotiations. I will say this, that thankfully we started early on. First day of session, I know that the House, the Senate, the Republicans and the Democrats alike, we've been talking with our leads in education, appropriations, even in transportation, health and human services. We've been having regular meetings all session long, and so I think a lot of the details, we at least know where each other stand and where the differences are at in most of those areas. So my hope is that we move forward over the course of the next few days. We're going to be able to set the stage for some quick negotiations to get us out of here, hopefully on time. That's at least I know what we're working towards. Along with me, I've got Representative Wilcox and Representative Manweller for any comments or questions, and then I'd like to pass it over to Senator Schessler.
Well, thank you, Leader Christensen. It's good to be back here this week. Senator Parlett, our caucus chair, has joined me today. We feel good about where we're at. I've said the glass is half full since December. And had we waited and done a traditional budget rollout, we'd be doing the budget rollout today. Instead, we sensed the need to move forward aggressively on a budget. And yesterday we passed out the budget and the last of the bills necessary to make that budget work. So we've completed our work on those areas and we're ready to go. We have more than enough votes for the job creating incentives that are out there that we can add to this mix. So we've got a transportation package out. We've acted on a number of other key areas. So we feel we're certainly ready to negotiate and finish the task in 105 days.
So one of the elements of that budget was the referendum bill to send 1351, or at least the modification of 1351, back to the voters asking if they've agreed with your decision to just fund the K-3 aspect. A new Elway poll released today shows that 53% of those polls said the legislature should find a way to reduce class size in all grades. So how concerned are you that if this bill does pass both houses and goes to the voters and the voters reject it, that we'll be back here in November or December readjusting the budget?
Certainly, Rachel. First of all, we've passed a 1351 fix. The House hasn't passed anything related to 1351. And let's go back to last year. The early polling said that there was no way 1351 could lose. People essentially gave up hope of organized opposition, and it won by a whisker. I think when the public sees the facts about 1351 and that we are making smart investments in the area where we get the best return on investment, I'm confident the voters will make the right decision. But
essentially, you have to run a campaign to ask the voters to not reject the
okay.
decision. So what does that look like?
Well, the campaign is giving, without use of state resources, of course, giving the voters the facts. Given the facts, they nearly chose not to last year. Given the best parts of 1351, I suspect the voters will make the right decision. But on the other hand, the House has taken no action on any plan to address 1351. So show us your plan in the House. Show us the votes. Is it a 2/3 vote? Is it a referendum? What is it? But we have taken positive action to address 1351 in our budget.
How about the House R's? Where do you guys stand on that particular issue?
Well, I think that they've taken the right approach, and one more weight to put in the scales that the voters, I think, will consider in November is the fact that there's no caucus, and there's also the governor, who have all agreed that 1351 is unworkable and can't be funded. And that wasn't a factor in the last election.
So last question on this, I promise. You support the referendum, or you think that there's a way to get there with 2/3?
No, I support the referendum. And I think by the time we have an election, you're going to see most legislators on the record on the side that 1351 is unworkable. And that wasn't part of the last election.
And I think too, with respect to the initiative process, we've seen some pieces of legislation this year too to make sure that should we or should we not be educating the voters a little bit more on the real cost behind certain initiatives. That's been a debated issue down here in Olympia. Now, we may not come to a conclusion on that, but what we have found is when we talk to citizens on these issues and you start affiliating or tying the cost to what they're getting, all of a sudden people start to wheel back a little bit and they go, well, wait a minute, I didn't think this was going to cost that much. Or the reality as you're educating folks may change or sway their vote on this. And so as we, the legislature, have looked at this issue over the course of the last few months, and we've churned through all the possibilities, and I would have to agree with my colleague that, I've not met a caucus down here yet, of the 4 caucuses or the governor's office has been willing to show exactly how you're going to be able to do this without massive, massive tax increases. And so this is putting it back in the citizens' lap to decide, to allow them to decide, do you really want to raise taxes as we're being told you'd have to do to fund all this stuff? So I think that what the Senate's doing is a good angle on it, and I appreciate their efforts there.
Follow up on Rachel's thing. I'm sort of asking as Republican leaders as opposed to legislators, who's gonna fund this campaign? Who's gonna lead it? Who's gonna lead the effort that's gonna say we don't need more teachers in the classroom? I mean,
Well, let's go back to the facts, John. 49.75% of the people said no with no organized campaign. Now with the best parts included in the referendum, K through 3, where we all agree we get a good bang for our buck, we're there. I look at some of my friends I don't always agree with. Jamie Peterson, for example, I think Jeannie Cole Wells. We've had some people across the aisle opposed it that really don't always agree with us. But there was Seattle Democrats that agreed with John Braun that this was unworkable. If they could do that before, I think now faced with the hard realities of it, legislators will do the right thing. I think maybe this time the governor will take a position before the election.
Well, and you've got a word limitation too on the voters pamphlet. Within a couple words, 100 words, can you explain to them how many billions of dollars in taxes they're going to be looking at to fund something like this?
Well,
That was not something that was put before the public when they had the first opportunity to vote for this thing. Is they did not, since there was not a direct cost tied to it. People, all of us as parents, we're looking at, this makes sense, let's vote for this. But if you don't have a direct cost tied to it as to you feeling what it's going to take to do that, I think that was a lot of what was not properly considered in the last election cycle.
And there's a Senate bill right now, though, that would address that. I mean, do you think that this is a perfect example of where if that bill were to pass the legislature, voters in November, if this makes it to the ballot, would see exactly on their ballot title how much it would cost them?
Well, that's similar to the bill that we were seeing in the House. There's been a few versions. I believe it was Representative Johnson also had a similar bill in the House that was trying to tie so that there'd be almost like a full disclosure. If you're going to ask the public to vote for something, trying to make sure that you've given them as much information as possible before they make that decision is something I think that is a concern that many of us do have. Jerry.
I just wonder why, if there's so much widespread opposition to the realization that it's not workable, why not just pass a simple bill, 2/3 majority, suspend it once your budget agreement's in hand? Why can't lawmakers come to that agreement this year?
Well, maybe we will. Hard to say. We're waiting for the House. I mean, there's a lot of bills for the budget that haven't been voted on in the House. There's a lot to do. We're sort of concentrating on the budget. But that discussion, I don't think anybody's really tipped their hat in the House of Representatives as to which way to go and how to deal with that initiative. So maybe they will. The Senate's made a stance.
Yeah.
We'll see if the majority, which is a slim margin, what they'll say. Because we all know the $6 billion to fund Initiative 1351 in the next 2 years is not there. And if my area where I represent, and I'm sure others, understood how much their property taxes would have to go up to do the local match, to build new schools and so forth, whoever voted for it, they probably would change their mind. So again, educate the voters so they know what they want. But what we did in the Senate was made a good step and say, let's really concentrate where we know it makes a difference on the class size, kindergarten through third grade, because the facts are out there already. That's where you get the most bang for your buck, in those first early grades.
Can budget negotiations start now, or is there, are the kind of things you're talking about that haven't been passed in the House going to get in the way of that?
There's no reason why they can't start. I mean, we all know we have, I think you said 19 days. No reason why they can't.
However, I'd point out that the Democrats haven't passed out of the House their ability to finance their budget. So the Senate has passed out both aspects of its budget, what we're going to spend and how you pay for it. The Democrats have passed out their spending plan, but not their financing plan. So it's somewhat difficult to negotiate when you don't know how they plan on paying for it.
Have you all, both of you just kind of
Over here.
each other, just saying,
Hold on a second, John.
Just to follow up, I just wondered kind of where that stands right now. Have you gotten together in a room, the four corners? Have you met with the governor? Where is that?
Well, first of all, it's what Representative Manueller and I said are not uncompatible. You know, we need to start the negotiations, there's no reason. But to negotiate that portion of it, I think Representative Manueller is spot on. And we will be meeting with the governor this week as a Five Corners. I am still of the belief the glass is half full to doing this in 105 days. We have some commonality in our budgets, such as the K-3 class size, the total dollars to McCleary. There's significant areas of agreement.
You have to remember, going to the end of June, like we did a couple of years ago, really hurt our school districts and our students. School districts have to make a decision in May if they're hiring more teachers. So there's a real reason, if you care about kids, to get out on time.
So to be clear, do you have Four Corners meetings scheduled for this week?
But
We have
haven't-
a Five Corners meeting
Yeah,
scheduled with the
governor.
governor for Thursday.
Thursday?
Yes, and that's to set up what we're going to be looking at into the future. Yes.
And do you think that, to President Manweller's point, that the House needs to pass taxes before you can, I guess, finish negotiations?
Well, we have agreed upon amount of money that's very close to the Senate position. We also have a answer to McCleary in the Senate. So it's, you know, if you write a check that you can't cover, you're in trouble. We can cover our checks.
Well, there's $1.5 billion unaccounted for in the House budget at this point. And so from the House perspective, how do you, in good faith, negotiate policies? It's kind of a non-starter. Which $1.5 billion worth of expenditures are you not accounting for? The case can be made for, if you look in the budget, there's a lot of things that have a price tag in or around $1.5 billion. And so I think that if you're going to, in good faith, move forward from the House perspective, you've got to pass the funding. If you're not willing to do that or don't have the votes to do it, you lose your bargaining ability there. And now you're going to, in my opinion, you need to really take on the majority of what the Senate has put forward, which is a funded budget. Now, we can work and tweak some of the details to it, but at least from the dollar amount of spending and the dollar amount of money coming in, that is the strength right now, that they have done that. The House has not yet done that.
Do you believe they're holding off in the House on the revenue vote because they want to provide political cover to some of their members, not make them take that vote?
I think there's
The Senate's
been,
not going to pass a revenue package. so-
those tax votes that they've taken in the future have been so divisive in their caucus and so painful that they are trying to put those off as long as possible. And I think, I don't think that they've got confidence that the package that they're proposing is even close to what the final agreement will be. And they just don't want to create any pain until they have to.
What are your thoughts on both caucuses on the payday lending bill dying in committee, and is there any chance it will be resurrected?
Well, I'd like to hope that, first of all, it's not payday lending, it's really short-term lending. And it does have some pieces that it could very well play in the budget because it is a vehicle that needs to be addressed. You can't, I think Senator Angel summed it up very well on the floor when she worked at a financial institution. they said, we can't make loans under $2,000. This is very similar to a Colorado model that was what the opponents were begging us for not very long ago. So it certainly could be a piece, and I think if it was put to a vote in the House, I suspect there's 50 votes there.
Well, and if you look at the bill, it's dramatically changed in the last couple of years. And I think one of the testaments to that is in the House anyway, look at who the prime sponsors of the bill are. There's more Democrats on the bill than there are Republicans on the bill, and there's a lot of people on the bill. Now that is because there's been a numerous, and I'm not privy to all the nitty-gritty details, but when I saw who the sponsors were, I said, wow, this thing must have changed. And he says, yes, it's changed a lot. And Senator Chesser is correct. There's a certain marketplace out there where there's just not loans available. And if we want to talk about predatory loans, when you start looking at because that's one of the things that keeps being used. I mean, for Pete's sake, some of the visas out there, interest rates, or you could probably debate, are they at near predatory rates? If that's what you're going to call predatory rates, is when you get to 20+% interest rates. Let's make sure we have a clear understanding as to what the new bill does. There are several states around the country that are passing similar pieces of legislation. And I believe that this is something that does, when I've talked to my constituents about this that use them, they want to have the ability to use these types of facilities. Now, that's their choice, and it's working for them. And if we can regulate this, rather than having an unregulated market such as we have in the internet, because you can do the similar things in the internet unregulated. You've got other entities out there, sovereign nations, different countries, and the like that are also doing different types of lending at this level. I would rather see where the citizens of the state of Washington have, a regulated version of this that we can keep track of in Washington state. And so nothing's dead until the end of session, but I don't think this is dead either.
How does it tie into the budget though, potentially?
Well, it has impacts. I think there's a fee involved, there's potential revenue. Clearly, it's a potential piece of a settlement.
Would the House Republican Caucus support what the Senate budget does with the collective bargaining agreements?
We have not had the dialogue on it yet, and we will. Today is fiscal cutoff for committees. We've got our final hearings and bills coming out of the House and the Senate is today. Then we move into that other mode where we're going to start swapping those ideas and getting involved more in the details of it. I think that there's a lot of folks that are interested, especially when you start talking about, the kind of the new discussion over the course of the last couple of years has been kind of that wage equality issue when it comes to even government employees, those who are on the lower end of the pay scale, getting a larger percentage of the increase. A 4% increase on a $100,000 salary as compared to a 4% increase on a $40,000 salary is a big difference. And frankly, they grow farther apart. Isn't that what you've all even been talking about? I think that our lower scaled employees, I live in Monroe. I've got the largest prison system in the state. Our corrections officers are not only some of the lowest state workers we have, paid workers we have, but they're also the highest risk workers that we have. And there's certain, I think, people that we have that are in high-risk situations that are being paid very low wages as compared to some of our zero or almost zero risk employees that we have in the state that are well into six figures. And so I think we need to be taking a hard look at that. I think that their angle on doing this is something that I think it's at least it's 25 to 30% of our lowest paid state workers see the highest increases. And so I think that, especially for our low-paid state workers, I think is a benefit to them. But we'll definitely have some dialogue on that.
Can I ask on payday lending really quick again? Have any of you heard from anybody who's a constituent who's not a payday lender who has asked you to make changes to that 2009 law?
Yes, both sides.
Who have you heard from?
I've heard from constituents that use it or those who think it's predatory. And some have
said
said we don't like it at all. I've heard some people.
There's no testimony, so I'm just.
Yeah, I've heard from people in my own neck of the woods in Monroe. As a matter of fact, in Monroe, I used to have 5 or 6 different companies all on the one main strip through, and I frequent a lot of the businesses in that area, and I've asked people, how do you like working with these? And many of them will say to you, and have said to me, we have not been able to get the low type of small loans anywhere else but here. And we know these people, they're from our community. And so, and if it's a choice they make, great. Then I've heard from others who think it's more of a predatory thing. Now, that being said, I think the bills that have been offered in previous years may have been probably more in that line, but I know that the bills that are being looked at, not only in our state, but around the United States, have made some dramatic changes to them. And I think that, you know, it's something that we need to look at. Is it an option we should be having here in this state?
And actually, of the bills
Yes.
that are dying today, is there any that you would like to see resuscitated in the next 3 weeks before the decision, since nothing is dead? But those that are on, who start getting out of committees, anything that wants to come?
It's kind of funny, and I'm sorry, I'm not going to be able to speak specifically to a specific bill, and somebody else might, but I had a stack handed to me this morning, and it was all the bills that were still alive. And we're having a rules meeting tomorrow morning before we go on the floor, and I was thinking before the stack was handed to me of just the Senate bills we're going to be looking at. But then I had 4 pages of House bills that were also handed to me, and it just, the stark reality is that there are hundreds and hundreds of bills that are still alive in rules in both the House and the Senate. And the question is going to be, you know, based on duplicates of bills, companion bills, and what we decide the vehicles are going to be that are important for us to move out and what the priorities are going to be between the Speaker here in the House and the Senate Majority Caucus in the Senate. Which ones make sense to let out in the time frame we have available.
I think we'd really like to see the No Child Left Behind waiver bill
Yeah.
come out, $40 million for education.
I'd like to see some of the tax incentives that are job creators on Eastern Washington. We haven't had a vote on the the server farm tax incentive, which creates high-tech, high-wage jobs in Eastern Washington. We haven't got a vote on the governor request for the food processor tax exemption, which creates jobs in all the rural counties. And we haven't had a vote on the R&D tax credit, which brings jobs to downtown Seattle. So we have bipartisan support. Democratic co-sponsors made a time governor request legislation on server farms, R&D, and food processor, and not a single one of those have got a vote, and yet they all create jobs.
And another one to add to the list, because we have it in the Senate budget, is for the aluminum smelters.
Oh, thank you. I forgot about that.
I can think of a couple that come to mind for me. First is the Injured Worker Recovery Act that went to the Labor Committee here that is all voluntary. And I think another one, I don't know if Senator Erickson's energy independence bill got out or not. I think that it gives consumers a win, and it gives people that want to reduce carbon a win as well. So there'd be a couple of others that I would add to the wish list.
I'm not going to tell you my wish list, because that's the first thing that you don't do.
Is there much hope, continued hope for bipartisanship again in the Senate after the late night the other night, and also just no longer having a bipartisan budget rollout as we've had in years past, the rule change, some of these other things for
Sure, Jordan. I think that the capital budget looks like it's going to be a very bipartisan joint effort. Last year it wasn't. This year it looks like it will be. We had that relationship in Ways and Means just the night before the budget votes. We had a number of Democrat amendments that were accepted, ones that were co-sponsored with Senator Warnick and Senator Hatfield. One roll call, but we went through it in a very civil manner, and I think went very well at the committee level. So I don't ever want to give up on cooperation.
You talked about, when you guys took over, you talked about bringing a new way of business and having co-chairs and Democratic chairs. So a lot of that has fallen by the wayside. So what should we make of all that?
Well, I think there's a few speed bumps along the way, but every time the budget gets more and more bipartisan as we go forward. Transportation, with opposition from other branches of government, still generated a 41-vote transportation package. If you think about it, that would be the equivalent of 80 votes in the House. So we have passed a transportation package that had the equivalent of 80 votes in the House, bipartisan. We had more than enough votes for the revenue portion. So, yeah, we can get it done, but we're going to have some speed bumps along the way.
I thought it was about, I don't have those things, but I thought the votes were like in the low 30s for it. And a lot of it was Democrats saying, we don't like low carbon fuel taxing and a couple other things, but we'll vote for it just to get it,
Well, you
get
know,
it rolling. And there was definitely a hold their nose aspect on
Well-
the east side.
I think both sides have to hold their nose a little bit, John. I mean, 20 Republicans voted for a transportation revenue package. And I think we had, the total votes for the project list, I think, was over 40. So, yeah, there's a few,
Everyone likes the appropriations part.
Yeah.
You guys
no, but we had a
also-
it was all bipartisan. Everything we've done has been bipartisan.
Yep, remember, we still have Senator Sheldon in our caucus, and we actually could have had Senator Tom, but as you know, his dad was in a serious automobile accident, and he pulled out, and if it were my father, I would have done the same thing. But it set the tone, and I think we'll get there to the end, by the end of the session. We'll wait and see. I haven't given up hope.
Switch subjects totally. There's I'm not up on the details on this, but there's a Seattle environmental group that's starting some sort of petition thing for some sort of carbon tax. And wanted to see what you thought of its chances. I want to throw at you, essentially they want some sort of carbon emissions tax. I don't know how similar it was to Inslee's proposition. And also, I think there was one poll of a few months ago that had slightly more than half the state liking a carbon emissions tax. So just wanted to get your feelings toward that.
Well, I think first of all, if we governed at the threat of an initiative, we wouldn't govern very much, because all you'd have to do is threaten to file an initiative and the legislature would do what you want, irregardless of who's in control here. And I think if you give the voters the information about what a carbon tax really does to them, I suspect they would make a lot more informed decision they did in the poll that you're referring to.
And I also think there might be a public purpose served in exposing the voters to a robust discussion, because up till now, it has been all about the benefits. And if the voters are exposed to the conversation that we have down here, where they understand that when you apply a carbon tax to a utility, the costs go by law right down to the ratepayer, I think it's a more informed voting base by then. And we might have a more informed discussion here in Olympia if the voters were exposed to the full discussion with the costs as well as the benefits. Or
John,
lack of benefits.
Since I read probably the same article you did about that, that article quoted that there would be a 25-cent increase in gasoline prices to cover the carbon tax. That doesn't do anything for gridlock in our state's transportation system. Our transportation package, for less than half that much, builds roads, provides economic development and safety in every corner of the state. So you could pay 25 cents and feel good about it while you're stuck in traffic, or you can pay a lot less and have a great transportation system.
Two more questions? Can I ask about when you're stuck in traffic, is there any desire to push through the distracted driving? It's over in House Transportation now. My latest word is they have to come up for a vote yet. It's almost noon. Is there a desire to try to get it through?
Yeah.
No, it's we're talking about Rivers bill.
I'm sorry, which bill were you?
Distracted.
Distracted
Rivers
drivers,
is distracted.
texting while driving.
Texting, no geo input of
No Netflix.
I have not heard, the bigger discussion that we've been having on transportation is related to the whole budget. And so when it comes to some of the different policy bills that are over there, I have not heard whether there's a big desire yet on that one or not. Today's the final day, as far as bills out of that committee, so we'll see if it comes up.
It's not a priority for you then?
Well, on the list of bills that we're getting massive public input on, that's not in the top 20.
Well, and I find it interesting. I sat on that committee for, almost 11 years, and I voted for the no texting while driving. But, the question comes down to, where do you draw the line? what about the pets that are sitting in your lap? What about, reading the paper while you're driving down the road? What about putting on, I haven't done this lately, but putting my makeup on while I'm driving down the road? I mean, all the distractions. And so the tendency in that committee is they pick on the one or the two. And, what about the coffee that you're dripping in your lap? And, oh, gosh, I burned myself. I mean, where do you draw the line on it? And so I think that's where a lot of the line, or what a lot of the gray matter is in that committee, is it turns into it's a personal thing. And so it's not a caucus issue.
Yeah, to go back to the
Last question.
1351 discussion, I guess you sound pretty confident that the voters are going to agree with a reduction in that, but is there a plan B? Like, are you thinking, well, if they don't, if it doesn't go our way, then
We haven't seen the votes for Plan A in the House yet.
I think that we are hard charging forward as far as when it comes to McCleary, that is what we know we have to do. And we've got what our deadlines are, we have what our goals are, and the question is, can we get the four corners of this building to agree on how do we make sure that we're getting the best education system we can, make sure the accountability measures are in place. And when it comes to 1351, there's a lot of aspects to 1351 that are comparable to McCleary. And how can you amend or tie some of those expenditures together? While then at the same time, taking a look at what are the areas where we just, as we were talking about earlier on 1351, where we would all have to agree down here for the most part that under the current revenue we have, without doing a massive tax increase, we're not going to be able to get there. Let's go back and I think that with a little bit of education to the public, they're going to take a second look at it as well, especially as close as the vote was last time. I think that that's a fairness thing. I think that, before you go out and buy that car, you probably should know how much it costs before you just decide you're going to buy it. And so I look forward to seeing how that goes. Thank you for your questions.